Hey everybody, welcome back or welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast by AMPLOS. Excited about the conversation you guys are getting ready to listen to. Have a good friend of mine of about 10 or so years on the podcast here. So recorded a conversation with Special Operations veteran Oran. Oran and I go way back to my brief little stint with Navy Special Operations. He's also a friend of the podcast. He and one of his Special Operations teammates joined us back on episode 107 in early 2021. So, Oran is a retired Navy Special Warfare veteran. He has 20 years of leadership experience from U.S. Navy Special Warfare community. He has top secret security clearance. He has a bachelor's degree in strategic studies and defense analysis from Norwich University. And he is actually sort of starting the next chapter of his career, just started an MBA program. So Oran and I are going to touch on a couple of just broad topics related to performance, to teams, and to leadership. Again, he brings a wealth of experience, and he shares plenty of that throughout our conversation. So looking forward to you guys hearing it. Here is Oran. All right, Oran, good to see you, man. Happy to have you back on the Growth Project. We were just talking, it's been about 5 years since your initial appearance, but you're officially a friend of the program. So welcome back.
I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
So Oran, let's reestablish some background stuff here for our listeners to set the stage for what we'll get into over the course of the conversation. Take me back to, exploring your background, but just, I guess, ultimately starting with the decision to get into the Navy, and then the transition into special ops. Just tell us a little bit about that. Why was there a draw to the military to begin with? Why the Navy? Let's start there.
If I think about why I joined the military, I think it's probably twofold. One being I was not a good high school student. I didn't have a ton of direction, which is a theme you may hear again here soon. But I didn't have a ton of direction, didn't know what I wanted to do. And the other half of that was so I essentially I didn't want to go to college without a purpose. And my idea was like I didn't want to waste money that didn't belong to me in a sense. I mean, my parents would say it belonged to me because they saved it for me, but it felt wrong to kind of frivolously spend money when I didn't understand the direction I wanted to go in. But I think the more important aspect was that my parents both immigrated from Israel when I was very young. Um, and then we would go on camping trips with like other people who had also immigrated and settled down in the LA area. Um, and during those camping trips at night, there'd be a fire, and all the parents would basically sit around the fire. And as I got older, I would also sit there and just kind of listen. And all of their stories eventually um, would talk about their military service. And none of them had served together necessarily in the same units, but they had been in the same places at the same times. And you could feel like, even for me, I was like, I don't know, 11, 12 years old, I could feel like the camaraderie there and like the shared experience. And I think that that had an impact on me that I wasn't aware of at the time. And so it felt natural, as I was getting ready to graduate high school, that I wanted to join the military. This was in 2004, so height of, Iraq war. Basically, we'd been in Afghanistan for a couple of years. So my mom made it very clear that I wasn't going to join the Marines or the Army. Um, and then I think I settled on the Navy, and I've thought about this a lot, but I don't know why I settled on the Navy at the end. I think I thought that I could fly like F-18s. And then I realized that's standards behind that. So I just settled for just the Navy in general. Um, but I remember walking into the recruiter's office, and there was a poster for the boat teams for swing. And I was like, man, that looks really cool. And I couldn't do it right out of boot camp because I wasn't a citizen yet, because I was born in Israel. So I essentially had to wait 2 years um, before I could like get my citizenship done and then screen to be in the special boat team. So I kind of had an idea that I wanted to do something different. I just had to wait a little bit longer.
So you came in with a little bit of a feeling of like, I think I want to go the special ops route, like from the start.
Yeah, just because, and the propaganda worked, the posters were cool and it seemed like a fun job. So I think I wanted to do that more so than I wanted to be on like an aircraft carrier or whatever.
Okay. So we're not going to, the purpose of today's conversation isn't to take a deep dive, into that process, training and selection and all that kind of stuff. But, I think that's pretty well documented. You did go through, or you have to go through BUDS training as a part of that, correct?
It's not Bud's first SWIC. It's just we have our own pipeline that mirrors a lot of their
Similar.
select, but
Right.
we don't do any of the diving or kind of land warfare at the end. But similar pipelines, without offending too many people. It's our selection is geared towards our job, but yeah, there is a selection
I got you.
pipeline.
Okay. And just explain, I guess, I'm sure you've had to do this plenty over the years. In a nutshell, give us your elevator pitch. Like, what exactly is a SWIC?
So this a SWIC is a Special Warfare Command crewman, basically part of the special boat teams, which there's three, one on the East Coast, West Coast, and down in Mississippi. And our job is intrinsically tied to the SEAL teams. We deploy as one, as part of a larger task force, and SWICs are basically the maritime experts when it comes to small craft. Uh, our bread and butter, so to speak, is insertion extraction, I should say, of special operation teams, primarily SEALs. We've worked with others in the past. We do some maritime interdiction, which is basically uh, interdicting boats overseas. So if you think about, tragically, the two SEALs that died recently off the coast of in the Malise out there during one of those kind of maritime interdiction operations. That was something that the SWICs were involved with. Um, and then there's kind of like a few other things that they do as well on their own, reconnaissance types of missions and stuff like that. But we're the only ones that really do it to our level in the military, and that's our background.
So you become a SWIC. How long did you do that?
Out of my 20-year career, I did that for 17-ish, 16, 17 years. Yeah.
Okay. But you went from at some point, um, I'm not the terminology here is probably going to fail me. It's been a while since I've been in your world, but you're an operator, but eventually you sort of shifted into more of a leadership role. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So operationally at the teams, pretty much the entire career, there was a stint where I was an instructor out in Nevada for close air support, which was basically teaching all SEALs and SWICs how to become what we call a joint terminal attack controller. So uh, the guy on the ground who's coordinating and calling in airstrikes. Um, so outside of that 3-year stint in Nevada, I was on the East Coast where we met, and then uh, Nevada, and then out to the West Coast boat team where I did about 5 years there. My last stint was basically at our headquarters, where I just oversaw the entire close air support program for Naval Special Warfare. So that was a leadership role that was different in the sense that it wasn't an operational leadership role. It was more of a programmatic, administrative type, making sure that people are, you know, operating within their limits and abiding by doctrine and manuals and things like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, so let's shift now. The bulk of the conversation, I wanted to hit a couple different topics. We'll start with some performance stuff. So describe for me just what role does mindset play, just in that career? Like as a member of special operations, how important is mindset?
I think it's probably 70% of the equation. You have to have kind of that fortitude and that resilience and the grit to just deal with the ever-changing environment. Because you may have a plan, and you should have a plan kind of moving forward to whatever the mission or the objective is, and inevitably, like, things are just going to go sideways or change just based off all these like uncontrollable factors. And it's the response to those factors that is going to kind of determine mission success. Um, and when you're a new guy or kind of one of the grunts, you just kind of deal with it and do, what your role is. And as you get further up in leadership, you're the one that's probably making some of those choices based off, whatever those factors may be, and ensuring that you're achieving mission success. So the onus obviously is higher on the leader, but everyone needs to have the same mindset and kind of focus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to a degree, I would argue, and I'm sure you would probably agree, mindset's going to be important just in the selection process, like just to make it through. But do you also think that that mindset is developed and cultivated just over time, like the more time spent in the teams?
Yeah, definitely in the selection process, it's a way of like weeding out commitment, and who really wants to be there when it gets uh when the proverbial, shit hits the fan, or when things don't go your way. So it's kind of, the seeds are there. It's like this is what we're looking for mindset wise. And you have to have it going through, as an operator later on at the teams. Um, there's a reason they look for it in the beginning is because they know you're going to face it, down the road.
So you alluded to this a little bit. How do you prepare for the unknown, and what lessons can, other people take from that?
I think we talk a lot about in the teams about course of action development and having contingency plans for when things, so you have the plan that if all things go your way, this is the way we're going to execute. Here are the things we're going to do when things don't go our way, or if this happens, we're ready with this. So I think just the idea of working through some of the potential problems, um, it does less like you're not surprised by anything at this point. When it happens, you're like, oh, I've mentally prepared for this, or we've talked about this contingency. So everyone already knows what the expectation is from like the top to the bottom. Um, so ideally there's less talking that needs to happen because everyone already knows, oh, hey, okay, one of the boats has broken or whatever. You're like, we already know what we're doing, without having to talk about it. And that comes into like practice and rehearsal and things like that. But we've worked through all of these contingencies. So there's not this like surprise factor of like, oh, what do I do now? Like, I don't know. And that's probably the biggest thing is just having thought about it and worked through it, um, enables you to make decisions a little bit faster.
Yeah. So you describe that as course of action development. Is that what you mentioned?
Yeah, so like you basically were like, all right, for an example, I've got to go to the store later. I'm gonna go to this store to get these things, but if they don't have it, then I already, I'll shift to this store or whatever. I mean, that's a really watered down example, but basically we're giving ourselves 3 or 4 different ways to get to the
Okay. But what
success.
I was going to ask is like, how, exactly how many contingencies are you working through? And I know that there's probably not a set number. It's more based on a lot of different variables, but I feel like a lot of people stray from that type of a mindset or that even that type of preparation because in their mind it's like, oh well, it's negative for me to think about it that way, right? It's almost
Right.
I don't believe in my plan enough that it's going to work, so I'm preparing for plan B, plan C, plan D. But the best teams in the world are like, nope, we're going to think through all these different scenarios and contingencies. So and just any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably there's a little bit of ignorance in that if you don't think like your one plan is going to go well. Like I think that's learned through trial and error, where you're like, this was a plan, it failed miserably. Did I then fall apart because my plan didn't go accordingly? Um, I think by thinking through things, you're preparing yourself and you're building like the mental resilience, so to speak, because you've thought about it. Like, and our contingencies to answer the first part of the question, like there's like contingencies for like equipment breakage. There's contingencies for, if the weather is doing something environmentally that we weren't prepared for. The biggest one obviously is like when we're talking about military operations is the enemy, right? We always say like the enemy gets a vote. So like how are we gonna react to a potential threat response, um, or if we're seeing something from the adversary that is we we're expecting or unexpected. So we would always talk about what is the most likely thing that they'll do if we get for us a lot of the times is like if we get discovered, what is the most likely thing that's going to happen? And then what is like the worst case, most deadly scenario? And how do we prepare for both extremes? Because
Mhm.
everything in between you can kind of mitigate accordingly.
Yeah, I got you. All right, let's shift a little bit to leadership since you mentioned again that's where your career inevitably got to is being more of a leadership role. What are key characteristics of an effective leader, especially in some of the high stress situations that you were a part of?
I think humility is probably one of the biggest ones. And that's knowing when you don't know the answer. I think as a leader, you probably want to spend a lot of time understanding the ins and outs of what your responsibility is and knowing you always want to make the right decision in the moment. Um, and but understanding when you've maybe reached your limitation there, or if someone's got a better idea, um, and being able to take that criticism and feedback and then moving forward and not like kind of lingering on that. Um, and then the communication is always super important. Um, and the relationship with the people that you're leading, what does that look like and how well is that defined? Because we worked in, 8 to 10 man teams, and when we weren't in mission or if we were, back at the team, you want to have kind of that cordial relationship, I'd say, and you want to have, it's like this brotherhood and you want to have that, what that feels like. But there are times in the middle of it where if you issue orders, you want them followed, and it's not the time for maybe a little back and forth unnecessarily or a little joking around, depending on the situation. So it's for me, it's like how do you define that relationship? Does everyone understand their kind of roles and responsibilities and making sure the communication flows well? And expectation management, of course, like here's my intent for an individual or for the team, and understanding the intent from even above my level.
Yeah. How do you build trust? And I guess along with that, a level of credibility as a leader within these teams in these environments.
Um, I think it's the trust is just built over time as you work together, and then you show that you are, who you say you are. You're not, your face isn't one way with your superiors, and then, you're another way with the people that are working for you. And then showing that you're competent at your job. I think naturally, especially in a community where like it's like, just type A dudes. Um, like you show competence in what you're doing, people naturally want to just be part of that because either you're serving as a role model in that sense, your stuff, so they want to also have that knowledge. And so that's a really good way um, to build a little bit of that. That can go down a very toxic road because if you're just trying to always garner like um, popularity, but I
Yeah.
think that was the best way. Go ahead, sir.
How much is just organic, like spending time with each other? How much is more of a social, aspect of people just also need to know? I felt like honestly, when I met you and some of the other guys, you almost just wanted to feel like, hey, this is just a normal guy too. And I'm almost not gonna I'm not gonna let him in unless I know he's just a normal guy. How much of that is a part of the equation?
I mean, the social aspect is a lot because we spend so much time together in the workup, the 2 year cycle, more so than with our families. So you really get to know a person and what they're about. Um, and so I think any like falsehoods about like if you're like a persona and you're trying to pretend to be someone you're not is going to get fleshed out eventually because people are going to see you even when you don't have the uniform on or you're just in the team room, whatever the case may be. So I think being authentic and like trying to be as real as possible, and knowing your limitations is probably one of the more important aspects. But that's been my experience. Surely I haven't had some of the leadership positions that other people in the military have, but yeah, that's kind of been my experience with it.
Can you think of a time that maybe you had to make a tough decision and how you worked through the decision?
Depending on the context of decision, if I've had a lot of time to think about it, if it's not kind of one of those time sensitive things, um, a lot of times I think bouncing the idea or not the idea, the problem set from a mentor or someone who was in a similar situation, another senior leader, is super valuable to get kind of and potentially an outsider's perspective who's not as close to the problem as I was, kind of maybe in the more administrative roles. Um, a a tougher decision that's time sensitive. You I feel like you kind of got to trust your instincts a little bit, and if your moral compass is in line, which um, yeah, as long as the moral compass is in line, then I think you have to trust your instincts and understand you made a decision that had to be made. Just like a decision made is better than one not made, right? And then you can go back later and kind of work through if that was the best one or not. Um, as far as like the toughness of it, yeah, I think that's why you go through, in my mind, the preparation for anything is so that you're like, okay, what are how do I prioritize, whatever my objectives are, and that will help me decide how to make this decision. Um, I guess it's kind of a nebulous way to answer
Oh,
that.
no, it's okay. I know it's a challenging question, but in my mind, as soon as you mentioned like, there are times when you have to kind of trust your gut and like or your instincts, but those instincts are honed like
Mhm.
during the preparation,
Right.
right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of that rehearsal and practice is so you're not, I think you risk making a not not a decision that's not as good as maybe the right decision if you're not prepared, if you're surprised, if you're caught off guard, if you're kind of on the back foot, so to speak. Maybe you trust your instincts a little too much and maybe they're not leading you down the right path. But if you've thought through everything as much as you can, it helps to kind of mitigate that effect.
Mhm. So you mentioned the role of even like a mentor. What's the best leadership advice you received during your time in the team?
I don't know that I received like a direct, I think it's more the examples I saw about having some humility, about not trying to be the loudest guy in the room, about, observing, understanding having some situational awareness. Um, and then, yeah, I think that's it, just leading by example. Like if you want something done to a certain standard, then set the standard. And don't be kind of two-faced about it, you know. Um, and just be authentic in yourself and people will accept your shortcomings, so to speak, if you're not trying to like pretend to be someone you're not.
Mhm.
Um, so the humility aspect, like the great leaders that I work for, like they were just there was no question about who they were and what they would do for you to back you up. And that's the lesson I took from them.
Yeah. Is there I guess a specific process? I'm not sure how to ask this question. Basically, how do you develop leaders within a team? Or is there something that almost like what this would look like in the sports world or the business world, right? It's like we see this person who seems to have a lot of potential. They seem to have some of these leadership skills that we think are important. We're going to identify them and almost like groom them to become that. What does this
Right.
look like in that space?
Um, it's it's probably not as refined as it should be. I know we've tried it, and in fairness, I've been away for a little bit now, but it's um, the naturally people, even within this like small community of guys who've been selected, like the stronger leaders will just naturally kind of bubble to the top. And then it's like you identify guys who just seem to be kind of more natural leaders. And then you try to just, pour some knowledge into them as best you can and prepare them because operationally there's a leader and then you've got to unfortunately also do the stuff that's not so fun with like the administration and like the PowerPoints and things like that. So you try to cultivate through that and it's like uh, putting them in those leadership positions even before they're actually in them. So it's like maybe it's like, okay, hey, you're going to brief these slides this time to gain some confidence in front of some higher ranking people in the team because you're going to eventually have to do this. So it's a little bit of that, what you described, where it's like, okay, we see some potential here, and we're going to start grooming you for the next position by giving you essentially some extra leadership tasks and see how you perform, and then help you to improve those things
Yeah.
down the road.
It's interesting though, again, just, and I know you mentioned this, but how formal and how structured like everything is. But so to hear how informal this process is, it just almost doesn't feel like it fits, in that space.
It's a little bit informal. There's formal in the sense of like, in order to be in a leadership position, you typically have to have done a couple of other things in your current position to then say, okay, you are now ready for this. That works in both ways because sometimes the guys that aren't like really good at that job, or that I should let me back up. The guys that are ready for that position, maybe more junior and haven't checked all the boxes compared to another guy, but they would be a better fit. And you're almost like you got to wait your turn, right? That's probably where the stringent part of the policy doesn't work out.
Right.
And you want to have a little more flexibility with it.
Yeah.
Um, it's not always the case, but I've seen it happen that way before. We're like, okay, this guy's here only just because he's checked boxes, you know. Um, and that doesn't necessarily mean he's like a great leader.
Mhm.
But there is a system in place where if a guy is just not performing in that leadership position, then he can be just kind of like, okay, you need more time. Let's replace you with someone who may be ready.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of both, I would say.
Okay. Let's shift more broadly to just, some team-based stuff.
Sure.
Um, this is a very simple, very direct question, and maybe you've already touched on this, but uh, what makes these teams just so good? What makes them so different from, other teams in any other industry?
I've had limited exposure so far with kind of the outside the organizations outside the military. I think it's just it's so much mindset where you're just like, I'm just gonna do it. Like I don't care if like it nothing has worked in my like this is just what we're doing. Like we're moving to this, we're executing this no matter what at this point. Like we're just there's a mindset and like um a mental like resilience. I know I've said that word before, but it's just like this no quit kind of attitude, I think, that you're just like, this is just what we're doing, and we're gonna laugh about it. We're gonna have this like we're gonna joke about it, and we're just gonna do it. Like we're miserable and we don't care. Like we're all doing it together, and that's good enough. Like,
It sounds like there's just such a conviction
yeah,
to
that's a
to
good way to
to like accomplish the task by any means. And that's the part where it's probably even hard to articulate, right? Of just like, I can't tell you how we're gonna do it, but we're gonna get it done.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like there's like this blind allegiance, like we're gonna do it, even if like we're all gonna die. Like it's not that. Um, but it's just like given hurdles, you're almost like awesome. Like I'm gonna just crush these hurdles now because it's like we almost revel in the fact that it's not easy. And like the adversity, you just learn to embrace it because it makes it like it makes it more whether more memorable or it makes for a better story. I don't know, but you're just like, yeah, there's a little bit of that like pride, like, oh, I am in naval special warfare, like I am this, you know, elite operator or warrior or whatever my background is. It's like I'm just going to do this because that's what's expected of me. Like this is what I signed up for. And that's probably where it doesn't translate to the business world because people are like, no, I this isn't what I signed up for. Like I got this 4-year degree or whatever. Again, I don't know. I'm just speculating, but it's like it's getting a little hard and I wasn't prepared for this.
Yeah.
You know, running around wet and sandy for 6 months, maybe that builds a little bit of that tenaciousness to just be like, yeah, it just life just kind of sucks sometimes and you just got to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's such a just it's a big part of the identity, right? Of like this is who I am, this is who we
Yeah.
are, this is what we do, and so on. When yeah, it's not always really like that, maybe in the business world, even in the sports setting to a degree.
Right.
That's interesting. All right, what this is a harder question. And I know you just mentioned you maybe don't have a ton of experience with this quite yet, so maybe there will be a part three here eventually. Uh, but what lessons from the teams do you think translate directly to business teams, sports teams? Even if there's some speculation to that, that's okay.
I think it's just finding a path to success. It's like I am assuming, and I've talked to plenty of people now that are haven't served in the military that were in or in the business world. Um, And it's just, there are hurdles in life no matter what. Whatever your job is, like things are going to pop up, are going to make maybe meeting deadlines or tasks impossible. So I think it's like, how do you get to yes? And how do you take like the tools you have available and just meet whatever mission success looks like? How do you continue to execute, to use a bunch of military terms, right? So it's like, fine, I can't go this way, then I'll go this way, or I'll attack the problem from this side, or I'll, you know, okay, our main funding source didn't work out this way. So it's like, who else can we use to fund, or what other tools can we use, or how can we get creative enough to still get to like solve the problem? Um, I think those are the things moving forward that are gonna, help me and probably a bunch of other veterans succeed. Is just like, all right, it didn't work out the way we wanted. Like, we'll just,
Yeah.
attack it from the other direction.
How be specific if you can, or as specific as you can. How is that trained into you during the process?
I think it comes back to that, like, you can't take no or fail for an answer a lot of the times. It's like, okay, so, if it doesn't work this way, then it has to work another way. Like there isn't another option potentially. And obviously in some cases that's not necessarily the case, but it's just that mindset of like, we are going to like achieve our objective and we're gonna win. Because if we don't win in the military, like the consequences are probably dire, right? So I think it just comes to a level of what are the stakes. And in business, the stakes can still be pretty high when you're talking about people's livelihood and potentially businesses closing or whatever. But it's hard to mimic the stakes that are in the military, because at the end of the day, it's people are going to die, um, depending on the scale of the conflict, right? It could mean the end of what society in America as we know it, or that's like pretty big. But you get what I'm saying. It's like the
Yeah.
consequences of failure are a lot higher, and so we just don't accept not reaching our objective unless
But
we've
so,
lost the plot.
is it a part of training though? Right. So, I got to view some training back in the day, and would it be, hey, here's your mission objectives, or we've defined what mission success looks like, and basically like you've got to go do it. And you go do it, and it was like that didn't work. We failed. Is it like, hey, we just go back to the drawing board and like let's develop a new plan, let's try it again? Does that make sense? Like, what does it
Yeah,
actually look like through the process?
yeah, there is. We're very critical, I guess, in looking at it from that standpoint about um, debriefing ourselves about what things worked and didn't work, even if it's like a successful mission and like very few things went wrong or nothing at all. Like we're still going to come back to the drawing board and be like, okay, what worked really well? What didn't work well? What can we improve? So we're always trying to improve the process and make it more efficient and more streamlined. Um, and so that mindset of how do we make this better is like constantly is just part of what we're doing. And we're always trying to re-examine, not always, we frequently try to re-examine the things that we do and that like the procedures or the tactics that we use to try to make them better. And that's part of that like humility and debrief process is like, okay, I thought I had maybe the best way to do this, but maybe there's a better way. And maybe it came from a guy who hasn't been at the team for that long, but he just had a fresh perspective. And um, we used his input to maybe make this a little bit better, or his background. Maybe he was like spent, um, years off the coast of North Carolina fishing, and he's got this great maritime background, and now he's bringing it to like this military team, and it's like, oh yeah, that's actually really smart. We should do it that way. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's
No,
it's
no.
maybe a
Is
process of
there,
refinement.
is there a part of it, and I'm just curious, where, okay, we successfully did this thing, but we're almost going to run it back and deliberately just try to do it in a different way? Like, is that a part of the process too?
Yeah, and we do that during the workup before deployment, where we'll have something that we're trying to do, whether it's like an example I'm thinking of is doing like a litter lift from a boat to a helicopter, right? And there's a couple different ways we could do it. And so we'll practice different techniques um, and find which one is the most efficient or the best use case for us. And then of course it's nice to have a couple different ways to do it, depending on what the environmental factors are or what the situation may come up. So it's like, yeah, there are a couple ways to get to the end goal here. Um, and let's practice all of them and find the best way. And then again, that's the co-development. You're like, okay, given the situation where we need to evacuate a patient from the boat to the helicopter, this is like way number one. This is way number two, maybe a little less ideal. This is not so ideal, but it'll get the job done. And this is like worst case scenario. This is how we're going to evac this guy. But like maybe we've ratcheted up the risk in that fourth one. So it's not the best case, but it has to get done or else this person may die or whatever the case may be.
Gotcha. All right. How about things like conflicts, or maybe, members of a team who are underperforming, stuff like that? How is that handled?
Conflict is can be common. You spend a lot of time with, at least in my case, on a boat with like maybe 4 or 5 guys on a very small boat in the middle of the ocean. So I think over time our personalities just tend to grate. Uh, One is maturity level. So conflict is just like, can it be squashed with just like, dude, whatever. Um, Sometimes it comes to fisticuffs, but that's a story for a different time, I think. And then one-on-one, I think what's worked for me in the past is just being very real with someone and just pulling them aside and be like, hey, we need to have a talk about what's happening at work. And in some cases, it leads to a bleed over from something that's happening personally that has now bled into professional. Um, and then just helping that person navigate that. And I may not be the person who helps them navigate it, but at least I can support them in whatever that may be. So if there's something going on in personal life, um, as a leader, I think it's really important to be able to identify that and not kind of turn a blind eye and be like, hey, let's figure out how to fix that so your professional is better. And maybe it's just a personality conflict within the unit or the detachment and figuring out how to make those personalities work. But there's such a diverse background that you've got to figure out a way to work with everyone.
Sure.
Um,
No, I honestly, I think it's probably really good and hopefully refreshing for our listeners to hear what you just described, because again, you guys are these elite, warriors, but like you're still human.
right.
And so to hear how, hey, personal stuff can leak into professional stuff, like everybody's dealing with that across the industry. So I think it's good to hear that. Would love to hear the fisticuff story, but we'll save that for another time. Um,
Wasn't personally involved. Peacekeeper. Yeah.
let's go to just a couple questions here before we wrap up. Kind of bonus questions. What's it been like? You're retired now. So what's it been like to transition from that high intensity career into civilian life? And still, I think probably trying to maintain a level of performance and a standard that you're aspiring to. So what's that been like?
It's been refreshing in the sense of I think if you do anything for 20 years, most people would probably be ready to move on. Um, a term I heard recently, which I really like, is I don't miss the circus, I just miss the clowns, right? Um, which I think is like really fitting. So I guess now I'm just trying to find a new circus tent.
Yeah.
But it's been refreshing. Like the flexibility, my wife has been so supportive, just amazing in the whole process. And has given me the room to kind of let things settle and figure out what the next step may be because it's still a little unclear. And the lack of direction I had when I left high school has now reemerged because I haven't had to
I
think about
figured that's where that was going to come back
yeah,
around. Yeah.
because I haven't had to think about it for 20 years. Like having the purpose and drive in the military is it's it's really easy. And then so it's like now, how do I find a new purpose and a new drive? Or what is my new purpose and what's going to drive me? What levers am I going to pull to kind of get there? And a lot of advice that I got was to take the time off and let that military time kind of bleed away, um, and that old life essentially bleed away and figure out what feels right. And so I got a plug real quick before we wrap up. There's an organization called the Honor Foundation, um, that's basically open to um, all special operators. They have campuses all over the country. And basically their sole job is to help us transition basically from military into the civilian sector and like translate the skills that we have and what it means to be an operator and their experiences and translate that into how we can be successful in the corporate setting. Um, and I think interestingly, one of the first things we do is basically kind of following the Simon Sinek model of what's your why and discovering what like makes us tick individually. And then what does that mean for us when, we're not in the military anymore and like the mission isn't necessarily passed down. You're not being told what to do, like given the ability to go track down whatever it is you want, like what is like driving you to do that and what's going to get you out of it.
What did that process yield for you? If you don't mind sharing anything there.
More questions than answers, maybe, but no, I think it provided some clarity as far as what really interests me and what I kind of want to get into what my next career would look like. Even though I'm still trying to figure it out, the network that you build from the Honor Foundation, which is part of a big part of their program, is the network and just having all of these people that you can talk to and that you can gain experience from and understand these different sectors because we're like we don't know because unless we've had some experience with other people, we've just been in our military shell. Um, and so I have a clearer picture. It's not completely defined, but I know that based off going through the Honor Foundation and having some of those like maybe tougher conversations with myself about like, okay, what is really going to drive you now? And what is your purpose essentially in life? That I kind of have a better idea of what avenues I want to pursue, which is cool. And it's a fun experience because I'm getting to learn a new thing. And I've told myself from the beginning that the easy answer would be to go into military contracting, and do a lot of the same things that I was doing before I got out, which was an option, was always going to be kind of this soft landing. But I told myself early on, I'm going to prove that I'm not like a one-trick pony and that I can do other things. And that's why I'm in business school and I'm trying to just kind of explore all of these different sectors to see what feels right and what sticks.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, testament to just like you mentioned there at the end, kind of growth mindset. I'm not going to let just this one thing define me. I'm going to explore some other stuff, learn some new skills. Probably
Yeah.
going to be outside of your comfort zone, but I think you're
Yeah.
probably pretty well suited for that. So, all right, last question. And this is definitely putting you on the spot, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say because I have an idea of some of the things I think you're interested in. But if you could instill one habit in every listener, what would it be?
Get better sleep.
Really?
Um,
Talk. Why is that so front of mind?
I think one, I'm really into the human performance world. Some of the part-time work that I'm doing is involved with a company called O2X. I won't get into that too much because I know we're short on time, but the human performance world, because of its impact it's had on me at the teams, I've realized how important it is. And we're talking nutrition, sleep, mental performance, and those things. So through all that, um, sleep has continued to come up as like one of those things that is just so important. Like to mental performance, physical performance, all of the things. And so like if you were to do anything before all of these other traits that you talk about all the time and that we've talked about today, like if you can fix your sleep, then it's going to be easier to tackle all of the hard goals that you potentially have set for yourself. So I say that jokingly, but also kind of seriously, like
Yeah.
get good sleep. It's going to make, the hurdles a lot easier in life.
What are some suggestions, tangible suggestions? I'm sure you're familiar with this and have probably spent some time with it. Like where do you even start? If I'm somebody and I'm trying to get better sleep, what do I do?
I would argue that getting a baseline of where you're at is probably the most important before you can start making some tangible differences. So of course, there's all the recommendations about not looking at your phone and turning the light down and stuff like that. But for me, until you know kind of where you're at starting wise, and by establishing a baseline, whether that's like buying an Oura Ring or a Whoop or just getting a sleep tracker app to see how good or how not optimal your sleep is, then it's hard to kind of make a difference objectively and not subjectively, if that makes sense. So like I can say I felt good, I had a good night's of sleep, but I don't know until like I see the actual data, in my opinion. So I would say you don't have to go out and invest a bunch of money in some of these sleep tracking devices. There's some pretty cheap ones out there, but know where you're at and then start doing the research on how to fix things and start with really small goals and then just maybe it's going to bed half hour earlier or not looking at your phone an hour before bed, things like that. But you got to establish the baseline first before
Yep.
you can make some differences, I think, my opinion.
No, that's great, man. I wasn't sure what to expect. I figured it would be something in like the human performance realm, but I was not expecting sleep, so I'll take it.
My second one would be adversity is good, and you should embrace it and do some hard things throughout the week, whether that's just, working out or whatever. But
Okay. I like
sleep
it.
is first. Can't do adversity without the good sleep, so I'll do that one first.
All right. Oh, Ron, appreciate your time, man. This is great. Good to see you. I think our listeners will be able to take a lot from this. So again, thank you. And we'll talk to you soon, man.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. Good seeing you as well.